as the first speaker, I'm very excited to welcome Alexandre Naulot. He is European Head of Advocacy and Campaigns at the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative. I dare you all to learn that by heart, so you remember that one. That's hopefully gonna be an impactful one. It's already an impactful one. They've already signed up organizations like the European Parliament that has endorsed the initiative. It started with states like Fiji, Tuvalu, Colombia signing up to it, and there's quite a lot of traction now of states, governments, individuals signing up to support the initiative. And I'm excited for Alexandre to introduce this topic to us and for us to have some interesting discussions afterwards. Welcome, Alexandre.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very glad to be there with you for this session on the end of fossil fuel, and very glad also to share our perspective on this. So, as announced, we will talk about the Fossil Fuel Treaty Initiative. And let's start in setting the scene. So you probably know that the latest state of the Global Climate Report, released last week, confirmed that 2023 has been the hottest year on record. And it comes after dozens of other scientific reports sounding the alarm. The cost of the current system of fossil fuel extraction is much higher in terms of lives, biodiversity, than the cost of the energy transition. It's quite was clear from the IPCC, but also from the International Energy Agency, that there is no room left for new fossil fuel projects if we are going to meet our climate goal. Because the reality is quite simple. Oil, gas, and coal are the main drivers of climate change, and they need to stay in the ground. But in the face of this reality, world leaders continue to ignore the facts. And governments are still on track to produce more than double the coal, oil, and gas compatible with the global warming target. And the biggest players, what are they doing? They are gunning for increased production. Even as the scientific community urges to cut these dirty energies, the largest Western fossil fuel companies, Total, BP, Chevron, Exxon, Shell, are set to spend $15 million every single hour until 2030. Just to do what? To produce more oil and gas. And of course, they are doing everything they can to make sure decision makers stay on their side. They sent a record, for instance, at the last COP28 summit. They said a record number of 2,400 fossil fuel lobbyists. And what they say to the decision makers, they keep continuing to convince our leaders to invest in false solutions like fossil fuel hydrogen, like carbon capture and storage. It's all about maintaining business as usual. For years, the fossil fuel industry did their best to diffuse the idea that climate change wasn't a reality. And now that the reality of climate change cannot be denied, they will do everything to expand their production. It's all about drilling more, building more pipelines, all of this to get more profits. So this dark situation brings about a legitimate question. Is there a real framework to plan out internationally of fossil fuel and with equity? And of course, the response is no. Take the Paris Climate Agreement. There was not a single word mentioning oil, gas, and coal in the text. And for the COP28, it was presented in the media as historic, but because of the first mention of the need to phase out and to transition away from fossil fuels, but it's a very weak mention, full of loopholes, full of false solutions, and it does not include any concrete plan to negotiate science-aligned phase-out dates based on equity. So the recent ministerial the recent meeting of the climate ministers in Copenhagen took place to turn this historic agreement into action and pave the way of the COP29. So what do we expect for this next COP? We expect that in Azerbaijan, to be genuinely historic, decision makers need to agree not only on words, but also on a concrete roadmap to leave all fossil fuel in the ground and in the past, where they belong. But we have to admit that the chances of achieving this level of climate action and commitment are very, very slim. Too soon. Yes, the Paris Agreement was critical in setting the 1.5 degrees target, and the UNFCCC will continue to be a critical forum to negotiate climate actions. But it's becoming evident that the phase-out of fossil fuel needs to be at the forefront. The climate agreements must be urgently complemented by a new treaty explicitly focused on phasing out of fossil fuel. And for which reason? The first one is, as I said, it took almost 30 years for the word fossil fuel to be mentioned in the text. There is a second reason. It's linked to the fact that the UNFCCC negotiations are based on a consensus model. And countries, unfortunately, are very, very unlikely to negotiate different phase-out dates at a COP in the near future. And the last thing is that the current negotiations focus only on the reduction of emissions and not on the regulation, not on the phase-out of fossil fuel production. Summit after summit, over the course of decades, our countries have been negotiating climate targets. But if you address only emissions reductions and demand without fossil fuel supply, you clearly allowed countries and companies to claim that they are climate leaders, but in the same time, they continue to open, approve, and fund new fossil projects. So, after this quite dark landscape, let's talk about the solutions. That's a few years ago, a group of academics, advocates, scientists, and former diplomats came together to propose a fossil fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. This is a framework where countries could negotiate a phase-out of fossil fuel in a way that is fair, in a way that is equitable. What is the goal? The goal is to push a group of leading nations to create a negotiating mandate for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty to move faster than the UNFCCC. And the thing what we realized at the beginning of this campaign is that we found out that we did not have any accounting or transparency on who's producing what and how much and where. So one of our main partners, Carbon Tracker, created the first global registry of fossil fuel production and reserves. And in providing the answer to how much coal, oil, and gas is produced, but also to where this production is taking place, the global registry provides essential information for governments to negotiate a global transition plan. And now we are also at work to create the three principles that underlie the treaty. First of all, we need, of course, to end the expansion of any fossil fuel project. We need to stop making the climate crisis worse by aiding the expansion of new coal, oil and gas production, and infrastructure. We, of course, need to progressively phase out of fossil fuel. and the wealthy countries need to act first. That means, for instance, that the EU should not create new pipelines, as they are planning to do so. It means also that France cannot claim to be a climate leader, while their financial institutions, especially the private ones, their banks, investors, to continue to invest in climate bombs everywhere. It means also that they cannot continue to support politically the giant oil project of Total in Uganda, called ECOP, and claim to be a climate leader. So, last but not least, we need a global transition. We need to respect global and fair transition, sorry. We need to respect the equity principle, because the challenge is to stop the expansion of fossil fuel will be, of course, different from one country to another. There are countries like Argentina, Uganda, or Mozambique that are opening new fossil fuel projects just to pay their debt. So we will need to take that in consideration in the new treaty. So here's the good news. Support for the treaty is growing. There is a growing bloc formed by 20 countries, including Colombia, Fiji, Nauru, and Tuvalu and Vanuatu, and so on. And they are spearheading an effort to secure a mandate to negotiate a new international mechanism to manage a phase-out of fossil fuel. They deeply work on setting and drafting this treaty to convince the other countries to join. And this campaign has been supported by a lot of different organizations. It's now formed by 2,000 civil society organizations, over 3,000 scientists and academics, even Nobel laureates. Recently, as we said, the European Parliament endorsed the treaty. Tons of different cities, 100 of them, have joined recently the campaign, including Vancouver, London, Sydney, and Paris, and more than 600 parliamentarians across the world, and a growing number of businesses are joining the campaign. So it was too quick. So we hear some criticism that what we are talking about, it's too big, it's infeasible, that it will take too long. But history proves that global treaties work, like the one against nuclear weapons, like the one against landmines. And so we will build on this to make sure that this treaty will take place in the coming years. The fossil fuel treaty proposal is a mechanism needed to complement the climate agreements. It's time for governments to take bold actions, especially for wealthy fossil fuel production countries, to stop throwing fuel on the fire. They need to join the growing bloc of nation states seeking to implement and to create and to implement this treaty, and be the first one to leave fossil fuel behind. So, if you are into bold actions as citizens, managers, businesses, and others, if you really want to join an ambitious campaign that is growing, you can be part of it. There are plenty of initiatives that can be taken together, as you can see on the slide. And I thank you a lot for your attention, and I'm happy to discuss with you after the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexandre. And I just got a request for you to stay on stage for a moment.
Okay.
Because I just heard we actually have a bit of an announcement, and I'm welcoming to stage Santiago Lefebvre, the CEO and founder of ChangeNOW. Over to you.
Nice to you.
Well, thank you for being here. We really wanted to have the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative with us here, because definitely, for me, this text is kind of the future. This is the future for me. We have the COPs, where we have the first step into the transitioning away from fossil fuels. But for me, the next step, the next big text that will, I guess, and I hope, rule the global agenda on this climate issue will be this proliferation treaty.
Yeah, we hope so.
And so just we wanted to mention that ChangeNOW just joined the Fossil Fuel Treaty. And we wanted to do that definitely because this is the sense of history, but also to mention that this is not just, I would say, an activist thing. You know, it's something that needs to be mainstreamed, and it can be when you have the European Union, the European Parliament signing it, when you have the first country producing oil, Colombia, joining it. For me, this was one of the highlights of the COP28. You know, definitely. A lot of people can join also, and we want to do this first step to sign all that. And so, thank you again for being here, and let's see how we can drive this together.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Santiago. Thanks, Alexandre. Thank you so much.
Keep that on.